Hello everybody, Chaz here. In this video I'm going to be talking about iPadOS 14. So as you probably know, last year with iOS 13, Apple created a separate OS for iPads called iPadOS. Now I think this is because Apple wants to separate iPhones with iPads a little bit, as Apple really want to get through to their users with the iPad replacing PC concept. Now last year, Apple supported all iPads from the iPad 5th Gen, iPad Mini 4, iPad Air 2 and all iPad Pros from the original. But this year, I reckon Apple are going to be ditching support for two iPads in iPadOS 14. Now, if you remember, iOS 13 dropped support for both the iPhone 5S and 6, as well as the iPod Touch 6th generation and all iPads that have the A7 processor. But iPads with the A8 processor did get the update. So the iPad Mini 4 got iPadOS 13, as did the iPad Air 2 with the A8X processor. This also got iOS 13. This was mainly because of the 2GB of RAM these devices had, unlike the iPhone 6 and iPod Touch 6th generation, which only had 1GB, but also because the iPad Air 2 and iPad Mini 4 were the latest of their range up until early 2019, where Apple released new iPads, the iPad Mini 5 and iPad Air 2019, but Apple was still selling the iPad Mini 4 and iPad Air 2 up until they released the iPad Mini 5 and iPad Air 2019, so it would be stupid for Apple to ditch support for a device they were selling only a few months before the update would be announced. Sadly, the iPod Touch 6th generation, which had 1GB of RAM, was also the latest up until we were about a quarter of the way through 2019, where Apple released the new iPod Touch 7th generation, and even then carried on selling the 6th generation for a little while. Now this kind of sparked hope for some iPhone 6 and iPod Touch 6th generation users, thinking that their devices would get iOS 13, as Apple was still selling the iPod Touch 6th generation, but then Apple stopped selling them and didn't update either device to iOS 13, leaving the iPod Touch 7th generation as the only iPod Touch that got iOS 13. But to be fair, the iPad Mini 4 and iPad Air 2 had a much bigger fan base than the iPod Touch 6th generation, as few people saw the need for an iPhone that couldn't make calls when they could buy an older iPhone, still supported, for not much more. Apple updated the iPad Air 2 and iPad Mini 4 last year because they were still fairly capable devices, but I doubt this will happen this year, as Apple probably want to get rid of the A8 and A8X processors this year for good, since they're not supporting any iPhones or iPod Touches with it anymore. They probably now want to get rid of iPads a bit too. Now I can't speak on Apple's behalf on anything, and we have no definite evidence Apple will not support these iPads until Apple announced it at WWDC this year, but it seems quite possible, and Apple don't want to push the device to the limits where it becomes slow and unusable like the iPhone 4S was on iOS 9. To conclude, I believe that Apple will get rid of the iPad Mini 4 and iPad Air 2 in iPadOS 14 because of the processor that they just want to cut support completely for, rather than partially supporting it for just iPads, and also to avoid stressing the devices to run iPadOS 14 when they may not be capable of it and may lag on it. Anyways, I do hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe and turn on notifications to be notified each time I upload. Anyways, have a good day. See you next time and goodbye.